Picture this: the year is 1400, and the streets of a medieval town are cloaked in darkness, save for the warm glow of candlelight seeping through shuttered windows. But these aren't just ordinary candles casting light on quiet evenings. Hidden beneath their flickering flames lies a secret, one that could cost the makers their livelihoods or even their lives. These candle makers weren't just crafting wax and wicks, they were guardians of a forbidden art, using their trade to fuel an underground network of theater that defied the strictest laws of the time. Tonight, we're stepping into their world where every candle held a story and every performance was an act of quiet rebellion. It's easy to overlook the humble candle today, but in an era when light was scarce and control was absolute, candle makers held a power few could imagine. Their workshops became backstages, their deliveries disguised scripts, and their clients, actors and audiences, risking everything for a taste of forbidden tales. The Church and Crown had banned performances they deemed too provocative, too subversive. Yet, in the shadows, theater refused to die. Instead, it thrived, passed hand to hand like a secret torch, with candle makers as its unlikely champions. How did these artisans, often seen as simple tradespeople, become the unsung heroes of a cultural resistance? The answer lies in the very wax they melted and the wicks they twisted, tools of their craft that doubled as tools of defiance. This is more than a story about candles or plays. It's about how ordinary people, in the most extraordinary ways, keep the flame of creativity alive even when the world tries to snuff it out. For over 100 years, these candle makers didn't just light rooms, they lit imaginations, preserving stories that authorities wanted erased. By the time we're done, you'll never look at a candle the same way again. Because behind its gentle glow lies a legacy of courage, ingenuity, and a quiet revolution that proved even the smallest light can pierce the darkest of times. So let's journey back together to the hidden stages and whispered lines of a theater that refused to be silenced. Candle making in the Middle Ages wasn't just about chasing away the dark. It was about mastering the very substance that made civilization possible after sunset. Imagine a world where light was precious, where the flicker of a single candle could mean the difference between safety and danger, between connection and isolation. Tallow candles made from animal fat were the everyday choice for most households, cheap but smoky, with a smell that clung to clothes and walls. But beeswax candles, those were the luxury of nobles and churches, burning cleaner and brighter, their honeyed scent a silent symbol of status. Yet beyond their practical uses, these candles held another, far more dangerous purpose. They became the lifeblood of secret meetings, whispered conspiracies, and performances that defied the powers that be. What made candle makers so vital to these underground networks? It wasn't just their access to wax and wicks, it was the very nature of their workshops. Tucked away in narrow alleys or behind unassuming storefronts, these spaces were perfect for covert activities. The long hours of candle dipping meant constant movement, the comings and goings of apprentices and suppliers masking the arrival of actors or audiences. The scent of melting wax drowned out telltale sounds, while the flickering light itself could be doused in an instant at the first sign of trouble. And let's not forget the candle's most ingenious feature, their portability. A bundle of candles delivered to a noble's manor could hide rolled-up scripts tucked between them, while a seemingly innocent order for church supplies might include coded instructions for the next performance. But the real brilliance lay in the candle maker's craft itself. To shape wax was to control light, and in a world where authorities feared the power of ideas, controlling light meant controlling truth. A candle maker could craft special holders with hidden compartments, or experiment with wax blends that burned slower or faster, signaling when it was safe to begin a forbidden play. Some even say certain workshops doubled as rehearsal spaces, their back rooms echoing with muffled lines and the soft shuffle of actors practicing roles that, if discovered, could land them in chains. This wasn't just a trade alliance, it was a silent rebellion, one where every candle lit was a small defiance against those who sought to extinguish creativity. The church and crown might have controlled the public stages, but they never anticipated how deeply the candlemakers' world intertwined with the performers. While officials saw wax and tallow, these artisans saw possibility, a way to keep stories alive in an age of suppression. And so, as the demand for candles grew, so too did the secret network that relied on them, weaving together craftsmen and artists into a web of resistance that would burn quietly but fiercely for generations. To understand why theater became so dangerous to those in power, we have to step into the mindset of medieval authorities. Imagine a world where most people couldn't read or write, where the church and nobility controlled every official message, and then picture the sheer disruptive power of a crowded square erupting in laughter at a play mocking a corrupt official, or gasping at a scene exposing injustice. Theater wasn't just entertainment, it was a weapon of mass persuasion. A single performance could turn whispers of discontent into roars of rebellion, uniting strangers through shared emotion in ways sermons and decrees never could. The church feared plays that reinterpreted scripture without approval, while local rulers dreaded satire that made their abuses public spectacle. In some cities, laws explicitly banned actors from wearing costumes resembling nobility or clergy, proof of just how threatening imitation could be. A king might tolerate criticism scribbled in a private diary, but a traveling troupe performing that same critique to hundreds, that was a spark too close to the tinder. And so, bit by bit, the noose tightened. Public performances required licenses, scripts faced censorship, and penalties for defiance grew harsher. By the 15th century, in many places, independent theater wasn't just regulated, it was driven entirely underground. Yet banning theater outright was like trying to stop a river by building a wall. The demand for stories for collective joy and catharsis refused to die. People still gathered, just not in market squares. A noble's banquet might hide actors among the minstrels, their lines disguised as drunken revelry. A midnight mass could double as cover for a forbidden passion play. But these were temporary solutions. What underground theater needed was permanence, safe spaces to rehearse, store costumes, and pass scripts hand to hand. That's where the candlemakers stepped in. Their workshops became sanctuaries precisely because no one suspected them, while authorities raided taverns and watched traveling players who would interrogate a guildsman pouring wax. Candlemakers had the perfect alibi. Their trade required odd hours, strange smells, and deliveries at all times of night. A wagon load of candles heading to a monastery might conceal a bundle of scripts beneath the straw. A backroom stacked with barrels of tallow, the perfect hiding place for a trunk of disguises, and when performers needed to vanish after a show, a candlemaker's apprentice could lead them through hidden cellar passages, their escape lit by the very candles that made the performance possible. The brilliance of this alliance lay in its invisibility. To outsiders, candlemakers were just tradesmen, but to the underground, they were architects of light, literally and metaphorically. Their craft gave performers the ability to see and be seen, even in the darkest of times, and in doing so, they proved something extraordinary, that when you try to extinguish creativity, it doesn't disappear. It just finds new fuel. The true genius of these candle makers wasn't just in hiding performances, it was in transforming their entire craft into a tool of deception. Take something as simple as candle placement. Arranging lights near windows could signal safety, while extinguishing certain flames warned of approaching guards. Even the wax itself played a role. Some workshops mixed herbs into their candles, creating subtle fragrances that masked the scent of too many bodies gathered in secret. Others crafted hollow candles with hidden compartments, perfect for smuggling tiny scripts or costume pieces past watchful eyes. But the most daring candle makers went further, redesigning their spaces to serve dual purposes. A vat of melted wax might conceal a trapdoor leading to a cellar performance space. Shelves stacked with supplies could swing open to reveal makeshift stages, their backdrops painted on the inside of cupboard doors. The rhythmic dipping of wicks into hot wax provided steady noise to cover whispered rehearsals, while apprentices stationed at doorways kept watch under the guise of tending deliveries. Every element of their trade became part of the illusion, a defiance hidden in plain sight. The risks were immense. In some cities, authorities posted spies near candle shops, watching for unusual foot traffic. A single overheard line of dialogue, a scrap of parchment found in the wax scraps, could mean imprisonment or worse. Yet the candle makers persisted, driven by something deeper than profit. Many came from families of storytellers themselves, their hands shaped by generations of crafting light, just as actors' voices carried generations of stories. Others saw it as quiet justice, using the very candles that illuminated church altars and royal halls to fuel the art those powers tried to erase. What's remarkable is how ordinary these collaborators appeared. No grand speeches, no heroic declarations, just a candle maker nodding slightly as an actor entered, or leaving a back door unlatched on performance nights. Their rebellion lived in the details, a shipment of candles arriving with extra wicks coiled into coded messages, or a rush order for blue wax, a color rarely used, signaling an emergency meeting. For over a century, this silent partnership thrived, proving that sometimes the quietest hands hold the most power. The authorities could ban stages and scripts, but they never thought to outlaw the flickering light that made theater possible. And in that oversight, the candle makers and actors found their greatest weapon, the simple, undeniable human need for stories told in the glow of shared flame. Beneath the cobbled streets and bustling markets of medieval towns, an entirely different world of theater thrived in shadows. Candle makers didn't just supply light for these secret performances, they reshaped the very architecture of rebellion. Forgotten storage rooms became intimate stages, their low ceilings amplifying whispers into thunderous declarations. Abandoned tunnels, once used for smuggling goods, now smuggled ideas, their damp walls echoing with muffled applause. Even crypts, places meant for the dead, were given new life as venues where forbidden stories rose from the darkness like ghosts. These hidden spaces weren't chosen at random. Their isolation was their strength. A performance in a candle maker's cellar might be reached only through a labyrinth of alleys and trapdoors, ensuring that by the time authorities caught wind of a gathering, the actors had vanished like smoke. The cramped conditions, far from being a drawback, intensified the experience. Audiences packed shoulder to shoulder, their breath mingling in the close air, felt every word vibrate through them. And the candlelight, it wasn't just practical, it was theatrical alchemy. A single flickering flame could transform a performer's face into a mask of tragedy, or twist their shadow into a looming villain on the wall. The very dimness that made reading impossible forced audiences to listen intently, leaning forward as if the story were a secret being shared just with them. Yet the true mastery lay in how these spaces adapted. A crypt's stone niches held candles at precise angles to illuminate key moments, while a tunnel's natural echo turned soliloquies into haunting crescendos. Some venues even used the Candlemakers' wax drippings creatively, melting them into makeshift seals for doors to dampen sound, or shaping them into subtle markers to guide actors through pitch-black passages mid-performance. Every limitation became an opportunity. When a space was too small for elaborate sets, the candlelight's dance suggested landscapes. A wavering shadow became a forest, a cluster of flames a distant castle. The risk of discovery only heightened the intensity. Imagine sitting in that underground room knowing every laugh or gasp had to be stifled, every shuffled footstep could betray you. The Candlemakers didn't just provide the light, they controlled it. A sudden dimming might signal an approaching patrol, prompting performers to switch seamlessly to an approved scene while scripts were tucked into hidden compartments. These spaces weren't just stages, they were living, breathing collaborations between artists and artisans, where every flicker of light was a calculated stroke in a masterpiece of defiance. What's astonishing is how these crude venues rivaled the grandeur of sanctioned theaters. Without velvet curtains or raised podiums, they achieved something far more powerful: intimacy. In the glow of those smuggled candles, stories didn't feel performed, they felt confessed. And when the final line was spoken and the last light snuffed out, audiences left carrying more than just the tale. They carried the unshakable certainty that art could outwit oppression, and that even in the darkest corners, humanity would always find a way to shine. In the hushed glow of those underground performances, candlelight was never just illumination, it was the silent language of rebellion. Every flicker carried meaning. A steady flame might represent the unyielding spirit of the actors, while a guttering light could mirror the fragility of their freedom. When a performer stepped into that circle of warm radiance, they weren't just entering the light, they were embodying it, becoming living symbols of truth in a world that preferred shadows. Take the way these actors used the candles themselves. A single taper placed center stage didn't just light the scene, it became a character. Its wax dripping like tears during a tragic monologue, or its flame flaring suddenly as a hero swore vengeance. The audience understood this visual poetry instinctively. In an era where spoken dissent could mean imprisonment, the candles spoke instead. A cluster of flames might rise together during a scene of unity, while an actor snuffing out a candle with their fingers could signal tyranny's victory or a martyr's sacrifice. But the most profound symbolism lay in the candle's inevitable burn. Unlike torches or lanterns, candles couldn't be relit mid-performance. As the wax melted away, so did the precious minutes of safety. Every flicker was a countdown, a visceral reminder that this moment of shared defiance was as fleeting as the flame itself. Actors wove this urgency into their craft, voices growing more fervent as the light dimmed, gestures more urgent. It wasn't theatrics, it was truth. By the time the final lines were spoken, often with only stubs of wax remaining, the message was clear: art, like light, refuses to be contained. Even as the last ember died, its afterimage lingered in the darkness, just as the stories lingered in the hearts of those who heard them. This wasn't accidental stagecraft. Underground theater borrowed candle symbolism from sacred traditions: the church's eternal flame, the vigil lights for the dead only to subvert them. Where authorities used candles to represent divine order, these performers reclaimed them as emblems of human resilience. A single candle passed hand to hand before a performance wasn't just practical. It was ritual, a secular communion binding strangers into conspirators of hope. And when audiences left, stepping back into the night, they carried more than memories. They carried the unspoken promise that while tyrants might control the day, the night, and its countless small flames belonged to the dreamers. Among the flickering shadows of candlelit cellars, certain plays burned brighter than the rest, stories so potent they became legend. These weren't just entertainments, they were weapons of wit and windows into worlds the powerful tried to erase. Take The Miller's Reckoning, a raucous satire that turned the tables on greedy tax collectors. Audiences roared as actors disguised the villain with the same flamboyant hat as the local bishop, their laughter cutting through fear like a knife. Then there were the tragedies like The Ash Tree, where fallen heroes mirrored real martyrs of peasant revolts, their final monologues delivered with fists clenched around dripping candles as if holding onto life itself. But the true soul of this underground theater lived in the folk tales, simple stories celebrating shepherds outwitting wolves, or washerwomen trading barbs with pompous lords. These weren't just crowd pleasers, they were survival manuals disguised as entertainment. When a character mocked a corrupt judge with a clever riddle, the audience wasn't just watching, they were learning how to fight back with words instead of swords. The brilliance lay in the details. A line about the fox who dined in the henhouse might reference a notorious landlord, while a lullaby sung onstage could contain coded directions for rebel meetups. What's astonishing is how these plays survived without parchment. With written scripts too dangerous to keep, actors became living libraries, memorizing hundreds of lines passed mouth to ear in Candlemakers' backrooms. This oral tradition made every performance unpredictable. A joke about the king's new taxes might sprout fresh verses by dawn, while a tragic ending could shift to hope if spies were rumored nearby. The very lack of fixed scripts became their strength. Authorities could burn paper, but not the memories of a dozen performers scattered across the city. Yet some plays were so beloved they defied the odds, preserved in the unlikeliest ways. The Cobbler's Lantern, a comedy about a shoemaker humiliating a dishonest merchant, survived scribbled inside a candlemaker's ledger between tallow orders. Another, The Silent Bell, was hidden in plain sight, its lines woven into hymns copied by sympathetic monks. Each of these surviving fragments whispers the same truth, that the most dangerous stories are never truly lost. They simply wait, like embers in ash, for the next breath of air to bring them roaring back to life. The legacy of these plays wasn't just in their words, but in their defiance of silence. When a crowd stifled laughter into their sleeves at a forbidden punchline, or when an actor paused mid-line to let the audience's hissed curses finish the thought, theater stopped being a performance. It became a pact, a promise that no decree could extinguish the human need to tell stories about itself, even if those stories had to be whispered in the dark, with candles guttering low and ears pressed to the door. The Candlemakers' workshop might have looked like any other, a haze of melted wax, the rhythmic dip of wicks, the murmur of apprentices, but beneath the surface, every movement was laced with danger. One wrong glance from a customer, one overheard line of dialogue, and the fragile veil of secrecy could tear apart. The penalties for defying censorship laws were brutal, fines that could bankrupt families, public floggings that left permanent scars, or imprisonment in cells where light and hope faded fast. For repeat offenders, the stakes were even higher. In some cities, actors caught performing band plays had their tongues branded, while candlemakers caught aiding them faced the loss of their guild licenses, reducing master craftsmen to beggars overnight. Yet fear didn't extinguish the underground, it sharpened its cunning. Candlemakers and performers developed an intricate language of signals, turning everyday actions into lifelines. A sudden snuffing of 3 candles in a row might warn of approaching guards, while a blue-tinted taper burning in a window signaled it was safe to gather. Apprentices swept the shop floor in deliberate patterns to indicate whether the back room was being watched, and the cadence of hammering wax molds could relay urgent messages to those who knew how to listen. Even the candles themselves became messengers. Certain batches were deliberately scented with lavender or rosemary, not for fragrance, but to alert allies that a raid had happened nearby. The performers adapted just as deftly. A play might begin as an innocent farce, only for the actors to pivot into a forbidden script if the audience gave a prearranged cue, a cough, a lifted handkerchief. Some troupes rehearsed two versions of every scene, one bland enough to pass inspection, the other explosive with truth. The most daring hid in plain sight, disguising satirical plays as religious tableaus. A mockery of a greedy noble might be framed as the parable of the prodigal son, with winks and exaggerated gestures letting the crowd in on the joke. What's remarkable isn't just the risks they took, but why they took them. For Candlemakers, the reward wasn't money. It was the quiet pride of outsmarting a system designed to crush creativity. For actors, it was the electric moment when a suppressed truth flickered to life in the eyes of an audience. Even bystanders who'd never dared speak against authority found their voices in the collective gasp of a crowd or the shared tension of a candle guttering too fast. Oppression thrives on isolation, but these hidden performances forged something unstoppable: solidarity. When a guard's footsteps echoed too close, it wasn't just the actors who froze. It was the butcher's apprentice pretending to deliver tallow, the merchant's wife admiring candles while blocking the door, the children scattering pebbles as a distraction. The entire neighborhood became co-conspirators, bound by the unspoken rule that some lights are worth shielding with your own body. And so the stories lived on, not despite the danger, but because of it. Each performance a defiance, each flickering flame proof that not all fires can be smothered. Alaric the Wax-Smith wasn't just a candle maker, he was a master of misdirection. His shop in the heart of Bruges appeared ordinary: barrels of tallow, shelves of finished candles, the constant drip of wax into molds. But behind the back wall, concealed behind a false barrel, lay a space no wider than a horse cart, where up to 20 people could gather on rough benches. Here, under the guise of inspecting special orders, Alaric hosted performances so daring, local officials posted notices accusing him of harboring shadows that mock the light of God. Yet for 7 years he evaded capture, thanks to a network of informants bakers who signaled danger by sending apprentices with unusually large bread orders, or blacksmiths who accidentally dropped anvils to mask the sound of applause. His greatest trick, crafting candles with uneven wicks that produced erratic flickers, a coded warning system. 2 quick flares meant safe passage. A sudden dimming sent actors diving into the wax storage cellar, where they'd crouch beneath false bottomed vats until the all clear. Then there was Marguerite of Lyon, whose delicate perfumed candles graced the homes of nobility while hiding rebellion in their cores. Her signature technique involved rolling scripts into scrolls thinner than a wheat stalk, slotting them into hollowed-out tapers, and sealing the ends with wax so flawless even inspecting guards missed the seams. When authorities grew suspicious, she adapted, stitching lines of dialogue into the wicks themselves using ink that only appeared when burned. A noblewoman lighting one of Marguerite's candles at a dressing table might unknowingly ignite Act 3 of a banned satire, the words materializing in brief flashes as the flame consumed them. But her boldest move came when the bishop's men raided her workshop. Instead of fleeing, Marguerite greeted them with a smile and a confession. Yes, she'd hidden messages in candles, then led them to stacks of deliberately flawed wicks stamped with pious verses. The embarrassed guards left empty-handed, never noticing the real scripts tucked inside the wax bricks lining their own lanterns. These weren't isolated rebels, they were part of an unbroken chain. In Venice, a candle maker called Luca the Silent trained his deaf daughter to sense vibrations through floorboards. her hand signals alerting performers to approaching boats. In Ghent, an entire guild of chandlers developed a system of fire codes, altering candle colors and scents to coordinate secret performances across the city. What united them wasn't just courage, but craftsmanship. They understood wax the way poets understand words: malleable, enduring, capable of carrying light across generations. When Alaric was finally arrested, legend says his last act was to press a candle into his apprentice's hand, its wax mixed with salt to make it burn slower. It lasted exactly long enough for the troop he'd sheltered to escape through the sewers, their final lines echoing off the wet stones as the light faded. Marguerite's legacy was quieter but no less profound. After her death, workers renovating a Lyon cathedral found a cache of her hollow candles hidden in the walls, their scripts perfectly preserved. The plays they contained, once punishable by flogging, were performed openly within a decade, proof that the stories outlived the tyrants who tried to erase them. That's the untold power of these candle-maker rebels. They didn't just preserve theater, they proved that suppression is temporary, but art is as persistent as wax, soft enough to bend, strong enough to carry fire. The audiences who risked everything to gather in those candlelit cellars were as diverse as the plays they came to see, a rare moment where nobility and commoners stood shoulder to shoulder, bound not by class but by courage. Picture a countess lifting her hood to share a bench with a tanner's daughter, both holding their breath as an actor delivered lines that could get them all arrested. These weren't just spectators, they were accomplices. The moment they stepped into that hidden space, their presence became a silent vow: no one would betray what they witnessed. For some, the draw was pure escapism, a chance to laugh at bawdy jokes or weep over tragedies far removed from their daily struggles. But for others, these performances were lifelines. Disgraced scholars heard ancient philosophies revived in allegories, while weavers recognized their own strikes dramatized under thinly veiled pseudonyms. Even local officials occasionally slipped in, their elaborate disguises fooling no one, yet protected by the unspoken rule that in this space, titles meant nothing. The real hierarchy was measured in who could sit stillest when boots echoed overhead, or who'd volunteered to block the door if guards came. What transformed these gatherings from mere entertainment into something revolutionary was the aftermath. A merchant might leave with a coded line of dialogue ringing in his ears, later realizing it contained directions to a rebel print shop. A noblewoman's borrowed candle holder could conceal a scrap of script passed to her maid, who'd memorized it by morning for the fishmonger's daughter to recite at the next gathering. The stories didn't stay trapped in the cellar. They seeped into the city's bones, retold in taverns and laundries with details shifting to protect the guilty. The most powerful alchemy, though, happened in the unspoken exchanges, when a candle guttered low and a stranger's hand reached out to shield it with their own. That was the real performance. When applause was replaced by 20 hands simultaneously covering mouths to stifle sound, that was the true act of unity. These audiences didn't just consume art, they became part of it, each person a living thread in a tapestry woven from risk and resilience. And long after the final curtain, that tapestry would cling to them, an invisible cloak of shared defiance no authority could ever strip away. At first glance, medieval guilds were the backbone of commerce, strict organizations regulating prices, quality, and apprenticeships. But candle-makers' guilds held a dangerous secret. Their meticulous record-keeping doubled as an encrypted archive for underground theater. Take the Guild of Light in 14th century Strasbourg, whose ledgers listed extra wicks for special orders when referring to rehearsal spaces, or Beeswax for high altar to denote payments to playwrights. These weren't just clever codes, they were lifelines. Guild masters, bound by oaths to protect their members, extended that loyalty to actors, using their legal privileges to shield performers from prying eyes. A guild hall inspection might reveal stacks of wax bricks, but beneath them, rolled scripts pressed flat as parchment. What made these guilds such effective cover wasn't just their secrecy, but their mundanity. Who would suspect a meeting of chandlers discussing export tariffs to be a front for casting a banned passion play? The guild's very bureaucracy became their greatest weapon. Complex initiation rituals masked the vetting of new collaborators, while annual feasts provided cover for script readings. Some guilds even funded underground theater directly, diverting a portion of dues into wax research that paid for costumes or bribes to guards. The risk was astronomical. Guilds caught aiding illegal performances faced dissolution, their members barred from practicing their trade, yet the rewards were sweeter than honeycomb. For artisans bound by rigid hierarchies, supporting theater was a rare chance to wield power, their workshops becoming stages where the lowly could mock kings without consequence. The alliance between guilds and actors reshaped both worlds. Playwrights began writing roles specifically for Candlemakers, their insider knowledge lending authenticity to scenes set in workshops. In return, guilds commissioned plays celebrating their craft, embedding subversive messages in tales about humble wax dippers outsmarting villains. This symbiosis reached its peak in cities like Ghent, where the Chandlers Guild secretly bankrolled a playhouse disguised as a storage warehouse, its stage rigged with pulleys to vanish beneath false flooring at a moment's notice. Yet the Guild's greatest contribution was institutional memory. While individual performers might be arrested or dispersed, Guild records preserved scripts in cipher, ensuring no play was truly lost. A ledger entry from 1462 in Antwerp lists £6 black wax for mourning, followed by seemingly random numbers later decoded as stage directions for a satire about a corrupt tax collector. These weren't just transactions, they were time capsules, proof that rebellion could be as meticulously organized as commerce. Long after the authorities had forgotten to watch the Candlemakers, their guild halls kept the flame alive, one coded entry at a time. The Candlemakers' most ingenious tricks weren't just about hiding performances, they reinvented the very materials of their trade as tools of deception. Take something as simple as wax drippings. Melted with certain herbs, they became invisible ink for scribbling lines of dialogue onto the backs of guild receipts. Held to flame, these seemingly blank scraps would reveal entire scenes in ghostly brown letters before vanishing again as the wax cooled. Other workshops perfected blind scripts, plays etched into candle molds so faintly that only performers holding the finished candles at precise angles could read them, the grooves catching light like tiny stage directions. But the true masterpiece of subterfuge lay in performances where light itself became the enemy. In cramped cellars where even a single flame might betray them, actors developed dark plays, performances conducted in utter blackness. Without costumes or sets, these shows relied entirely on voice and sound. The creak of a floorboard becoming a dungeon door, the rattle of chains mimicked by shaking a sack of metal scraps. Audiences would sit gripping their neighbors' hands, following the story through whispers that seemed to come from all directions at once. A villain's monologue might slither from the ceiling beams while the hero's voice rose from beneath the floorboards, creating illusions no candle could match. Some candle makers took this further, crafting talking wicks candles with hollow cores filled with tightly coiled strips of parchment. As the flame burned down, it would gradually ignite these hidden scrolls, making them crackle with unexpected rhythms. To the untrained ear, it sounded like ordinary candle noise, but to performers, those pops and hisses were cues. 3 quick sputters meant switch to the backup scene, while a long sizzle signaled all clear. The wax itself became an instrument, its melting time to mark scene changes, a puddle forming at the base of a candle precisely as a tragic hero reached their breaking point. The boldest innovation came from chandlers near the French border, who discovered that adding saltpeter to wax created slow-burning candles that emitted faint smoke trails. In underground venues with no ventilation, these trails would linger, allowing actors to move through the haze like ghosts while obscuring their faces from potential informants in the crowd. A single strategically placed smoke candle could cloak an entire troop's exit within minutes, leaving baffled guards staring at an empty cellar with nothing but dissipating tendrils as evidence. What made these techniques so revolutionary wasn't just their cleverness, it was how they turned limitations into strengths. Where authorities saw darkness as a weapon against rebellion, candlemakers proved shadows could be allies. A play performed blindfolded forced audiences to listen more deeply than they ever had in daylight. Scripts hidden in wax ensured only those who truly cherished the words would go through the trouble of uncovering them. Even the constant threat of discovery became part of the art, with actors weaving the sound of distant footsteps into scenes, turning real fear into theatrical tension. This wasn't just survival, it was alchemy. The very constraints meant to erase underground theater instead distilled it to its purest form. Stories so powerful they didn't need light, costumes, or even visibility to endure. When authorities finally raided one legendary dark play in Florence, they burst in to find nothing but an empty room, still echoing with the last line delivered from some unseen corner. You can chain the hands that hold the candles, but who will chain the dark? By the late 16th century, cracks began appearing in the walls of censorship. In cities where reform had softened the grip of church and crown, underground theater crept cautiously into the light. Abandoned crypts gave way to open-air courtyards, and the coded signals of candlemakers transformed into playbills nailed boldly to tavern doors. But this wasn't surrender, it was evolution. The same plays once whispered in cellars now rang from temporary stages, their satire sharper for having been forged in secrecy. Audiences who once stifled laughter now roared openly at jabs against corrupt officials, their boldness a direct challenge to the powers that had failed to silence them. Yet not all shadows retreated. In regions where oppression clung like damp to stone, candlemakers kept their hidden rooms ready. Venetian artisans still crafted hollow candles for smuggling scripts, while German guilds maintained their encrypted ledgers just in case. The difference now was choice. Where performers could take bows in sunlight, they did. Where darkness remained safer, the old networks hummed on, a living insurance policy against backsliding into tyranny. The true testament to this era lies in the public theaters that rose from the ashes of secrecy. Architecturally, they paid homage to their clandestine origins, trapdoors perfect for quick disappearances, backstage passages as convoluted as cellar tunnels, and candlelit atmospheres that deliberately echoed the intimacy of those underground gatherings. Playwrights, too, honored the past. The same devices that once fooled authorities, double meanings, allegorical characters, sudden plot shifts became celebrated techniques. A play might open as a frivolous romance, only to pivot into scathing political commentary. The audience's delighted recognition, a nod to the days when such twists weren't artistry but survival. Even the candlemakers themselves found new roles. Some transitioned into stagecraft, their wax molding skills perfect for creating lifelike props or special effects. Others became guardians of tradition, teaching actors the old signals, how to read a flickering flame as a cue or disguise a protest song as a lullaby. The most poignant legacy, though, was intangible, the unshakable belief that theater belonged not to rulers but to the people. When a public square performance in Prague was shut down by guards in 1612, the actors didn't flee. They simply moved the crowd 2 streets over and resumed, their audience holding aloft hundreds of candles in a silent rebuke. The authorities, outnumbered by light, turned away. This was the underground's final gift, not just stories or techniques, but the conviction that creativity could outlast any edict. The candlemakers who once hid scripts in wax now saw their craft openly celebrated in prologues thanking the keepers of the flame. Yet in attics and workshops across Europe, a few stubborn artisans still pressed clay fragments into candle molds, not from fear, but from memory, because some fires burn brightest when you remember how close they came to going out. The legacy of those candlelit performances stretches far beyond the medieval period, shaping storytelling in ways we still feel today. Think about the thrill of a modern mystery novel, where clues hide in plain sight. That tradition of layered meaning traces straight back to scripts designed to fool censors with innocent surfaces and dangerous depths. Or consider the raw intimacy of underground comedy clubs today, where the crowd leans in close, hanging on every word, that electric connection between performer and audience. It was perfected in those hidden cellars where silence could mean survival and laughter had to be smuggled like contraband. Some of the most powerful plays from that era survived solely through these secret networks. Take The Widow's Coins, a scathing satire about church corruption. Banned in every public square, it lived on through candlemakers who etched its lines into wax tablets later melted down for reuse, each performance literally borrowed from the raw materials of the next. Other works survived through sheer stubborn repetition, passed mouth to ear across generations until safer times arrived. The plays that emerged weren't just preserved, they were pressure-forged, their dialogue sharpened by necessity into blades that could cut through centuries. But the real cultural miracle wasn't just the survival of these stories, it was how oppression transformed the art itself. With no room for elaborate sets, playwrights mastered the power of suggestion. A single line about the oak's shadow could conjure an entire forest in listeners' minds, a technique modern filmmakers echo when implying vast worlds with careful details. Forced to perform in whispers, actors developed micro-gestures, a twitch of the fingers conveying grief, a tilted head signaling conspiracy, that became the foundation of subtle screen acting centuries later. Even the constraints bred creativity. Time limits imposed by guttering candles led to tightly paced 3-act structures still used in Hollywood today. Perhaps the most enduring gift was the understanding that art doesn't require permission. Those candlemakers and actors proved creativity is as essential as breathing. It finds cracks in walls, breathes in locked rooms, reinvents its form rather than cease. When you watch a protest song go viral today or see graffiti transform a prison wall, you're witnessing the same spirit that once burned in hidden cellars. The tools have changed, but the fire remains identical, the unshakable belief that no authority gets to decide which stories matter. Modern theater owes these rebels more than techniques, it owes them its soul. The improv troupe breaking rules on a tiny stage, the playwright coding political fury into fairy tales, even the YouTube creator threading subversive ideas into entertainment, they're all inheritors of that candlelit defiance. Because the greatest lesson from the underground wasn't how to hide art, but how to make it indelible. Those medieval performers knew something we occasionally forget, that the stories people risk everything to hear are the ones that outlast empires. And when you next sit in a darkened theater or lose yourself in a film, remember the glow on your face connects you to an unbroken chain of flame keepers stretching back 800 years. Beatrice of Flanders never appeared in any guild records as a candle maker, yet her workshop supplied wax to half the underground theaters in Bruges. Operating under the guise of a widow selling devotional candles, she turned her modest home into a stage where the most daring satires of the era came to life. While men dominated the guild halls, women like Beatrice worked in the shadows, their homes perfect covers for clandestine performances. A back room might store costumes beneath piles of linen, while a child's cradle held scripts rolled into swaddling bands. The very domesticity that made them invisible to authorities became their greatest asset. Who would suspect a mother kneading dough by the hearth was also rehearsing lines with a disguised actor, her infant's cries masking their whispers. Female performers faced even greater risks. In a world where women were barred from public stages, many took radical steps, binding their chests, cropping their hair, and adopting male personas to join traveling troupes. Young Juliana of Provence famously performed for 3 years as Julian the Fool. Her high notes explained away as a castrato's voice until a botched tavern brawl revealed her identity. Others found subtler ways to contribute. Midwives, with their unrestricted movement between households, became ideal script couriers, hiding dialogue between pages of herbal remedy books. Laundresses stitched coded messages into the hems of actors' shirts, the steam of their washhouses obscuring murmured plot changes. What's often forgotten is how these women reshaped the stories themselves. While public theatre relegated female characters to passive victims or wicked temptresses, underground plays, often shaped by female collaborators, burst with complexity. In Beatrice's cellar, audiences saw washerwomen outsmart bishops, aging queens dismantle corrupt courts, and peasant girls debate philosophy with traveling scholars. These weren't just roles, they were revelations, proof that women's voices could carry weight beyond the home. The most ingenious innovation came from the candlemakers themselves. Women like Marguerite of Ghent developed message tapers, candles with colored wax layers that, when burned in sequence, revealed instructions for next week's performance. A red layer meant change the venue, blue signaled new actors had arrived, and a rare gold core indicated a noble patron was bankrolling the show. These cues traveled through women's networks, market vendors, lace makers, even nuns in cloistered convents who burned the candles during Vespers to decode their secrets. The legacy of these women is measured not just in scripts saved or performances staged, but in the cracks they pried open in a rigid society. When young girls peeked through kitchen doors to watch their mothers transform into heroines before a flickering candle's glow, they glimpsed a world where stories weren't dictated by the powerful, but shaped by those who refused to be silenced. Long before women's rights were a public debate, these hidden stages proved imagination had no gender, and rebellion could wear an apron as easily as a crown. Music in underground theatre wasn't played, it was conjured from the very bones of the spaces themselves. Imagine performers with no instruments, no written scores, transforming their limitations into art. A wooden bench became a drum when struck with the heel of a boot. Chains hanging from cellar ceilings clanked in deliberate rhythms, mimicking the tolling of forbidden church bells. Even the flick of a fingernail against a candle's wax casing could keep time, the soft ticks blending with the audience's own nervous breaths to create an organic soundtrack. The acoustics of these hidden venues shaped the sound as much as the performers did. Low stone tunnels amplified whispers into ghostly echoes, so an actor's confession seemed to bounce off walls like a circling spirit. In one legendary Munich cellar, performers discovered that standing near a particular damp patch made their voices resonate unnaturally soon. That spot was reserved for villains' monologues, their words slithering through the room as if the stones themselves were speaking. Other troupes used water strategically. A washtub placed beneath a grate could make footsteps sound distant when the actor was mere inches away, creating illusions of depth in cramped spaces. But the true genius lay in how these sounds manipulated emotions without overt spectacle. A sudden silence after rhythmic stomping could tighten chests with anticipation. The slow, synchronized tapping of candle holders might mimic a heartbeat quickening with fear. Some plays even incorporated the audience into the soundscape. A guide would teach simple patterns beforehand, so at key moments, 50 hands could drum softly on knees, creating a thunderstorm's rumble or an approaching army's march. The most haunting effects came from pure accident. In Toulouse, performers rehearsing near a well found their voices warped by the shaft's natural reverb. Soon, they were lowering actors down the well during performances, their lines rising from the earth itself. Another troupe near the Alps used copper pipes stolen from a monastery's renovation. When struck, they emitted tones so pure, listeners swore they heard angels humming. These weren't just workarounds, they were reinventions. Deprived of conventional music, underground theater rediscovered sound's primal power. The way rhythm bypasses reason to speak directly to the gut, how a perfectly timed pause can terrify more than any scream. What survived from these experiments was more than technique, it was philosophy. Modern immersive theater owes its whisper-to-ear intimacy to those candlelit cellars. The creak of a floorboard in a horror film, the distant drip of water in a suspense scene, these are descendants of an era when sound wasn't decoration but survival. Because when your story risks lives to be told, every rustle, every breath, every flicker of flame becomes a note in the symphony of defiance. Authorities called it propaganda, crude rebellion disguised as entertainment. But step inside one of those hidden performances, and you'd witness something far more dangerous. Artistry so precise, it turned subversion into an act of beauty. Take the infamous Song of the Silent Bell, a play banned in 3 kingdoms for its portrayal of a town resisting tyranny. On the surface, it was political dynamite, a village refusing to ring their bell for the king's procession. But what made it unforgettable wasn't the rebellion, it was the aching humanity. The playwright gave the bell ringer a stutter, his struggle to speak mirroring his struggle to resist. When he finally smashed the bell rather than ring it, the moment wasn't triumphant, it was devastating. This wasn't a blunt weapon of dissent, it was a masterpiece that made oppression feel personal, intimate. The real genius of these plays lay in their duality. A love scene might unfold with 2 actors passing a single candle between them, romantic to most, but to those in the know, a coded lesson in sharing clandestine pamphlets. A drunken fool's ramblings could parody the local duke's latest edict while making uneducated audiences roar with laughter. Even the staging was layered. In one surviving sketch from a Lyon Candlemaker's ledger, directions show how a single bench represented a tavern, then a prison, then a judge's podium, each transformation marked by how the candlelight hit it. Authorities saw crude mockery, but the truth was far more threatening. This was art sharpened to a needle's point, able to pierce armor that would deflect a sword. What terrified censors most wasn't the sedition, it was the sophistication. A banned script recovered from a hollowed-out candle in Prague didn't just attack corruption. It wove the critique into a heartbreaking fable about a beekeeper whose hives were stolen by the church. The metaphor was obvious, but the execution poetic. The beekeeper's grief over his stolen honey mirrored real peasant taxes, yet the story stood on its own as a tender tragedy. That was the real rebellion, proving that truth and beauty could coexist, that a story could be both weapon and heirloom. This delicate balance transformed audiences. A nobleman might attend for the thrill of breaking rules, only to leave haunted by a line comparing his silks to a starving child's shroud. A blacksmith who came to laugh at bawdy jokes found himself staring at his calloused hands during a monologue about labor. The plays didn't just preach, they made injustice visceral. When an actor playing a hanged man gasped his last words with a candle flickering between his fingers, the light didn't symbolize hope. It was life itself, fragile, brief, and worth fighting for. By the time authorities realized these weren't just rabble-rousing skits, it was too late. The stories had already done what blunt force never could. They'd made dissent beautiful, and beauty, once seen, can't be unseen. A man might forget a protest chant, but he'd remember the way a candle's shadow made a weeping mother's silhouette fill an entire wall. That was the Candlemaker's final trick, proving that art isn't the opposite of rebellion. It's rebellion's most enduring flame. Buried beneath wax-stained pages and gilt ledger entries, the surviving scripts of underground theater tell a story far richer than official records dared to record. One such manuscript, discovered pressed between the pages of a Strasbourg chandler's account book from 1483, begins with what appears to be a dull inventory of wick supplies until you notice the alternating letters spell out the opening lines of The Cobbler's Lantern, a banned satire about a shoemaker who outwits a tax collector by crafting boots that make the wearer dance uncontrollably. The real genius lies in the margins, where candle drippings were deliberately smudged to conceal stage directions. A thumbprint here indicating when actors should turn their backs to the audience to mock a noble's exit. A wax blob there marking the precise moment to extinguish all lights and let darkness underscore a punchline about corruption. These weren't just hidden texts, they were living blueprints for rebellion. A script recovered from a hollowed-out candle mold in Ghent contained not just dialogue, but meticulous notes on how to adapt performances for different spaces. For crypts, it advised, have the villain speak near the dampest wall, his voice will echo like death. Another, scribbled in lemon juice between guild meeting minutes, specified which candles burned fastest. Use the tallow ones for comic scenes, beeswax for monologues. Their steady light makes tears glisten. The most heartbreaking might be a fragment from Lyon, where a candlemaker's widow sewed lines of a lost play into her deceased husband's shroud. The stitches, visible only when held to light, formed the closing speech of a martyr. You may bury our words, but wax always rises to the surface. What emerges from these fragments is a testament to collective genius. Plays weren't static, they evolved with each performance, annotated by countless hands. A single script might bear a candlemaker's reminder to add more smoke for the prison scene, an actor's scrawl changing king to pig midline, and a baker's wife's suggestion to toss flour during the finale to simulate snow. This wasn't vandalism, it was democracy in action, proof that stories belonged to those who risked to tell them. The greatest revelation, how much wit flourished in the shadows. One ledger from Bruges lists £40 black wax for morning plays, followed by a ribald limerick mocking the very officials who'd commissioned the order. Another script interrupts a tragic scene with a candlemaker's doodle of the villain wearing a bishop's hat, an inside joke for performers. Even in exile, these artists refused to let oppression steal their laughter. Most astonishing are the techniques used to preserve pacing without clocks. A script from Venice uses candle measurements as timers. When the flame reaches the second finger's width, begin the duel. Another from Cologne instructs actors to slow their breathing to match the dripping of a suspended wax globule, creating unbearable tension. These weren't just plays, they were symphonies of resistance, every element tuned to the materials at hand. The miracle isn't that these scripts survived, but how they transcend their origins. That shoemaker's satire, it resurfaced verbatim in an 18th century London comedy. The martyr's monologue echoed in a protest song during the French Revolution. Like wax softened by heat, these stories took new shapes in new hands, proving that what authorities try to bury often rises again, lighter, brighter, and infinitely harder to extinguish. The flickering shadows of those medieval cellars didn't just vanish with the dawn of public theaters, they stretched across centuries, reshaping how we experience stories today. Walk into any modern immersive production, where actors brush past you in candlelit corridors or whisper secrets directly into your ear, and you're stepping into a tradition forged by those underground rebels. The connection isn't just thematic, it's visceral. Like their clandestine predecessors, today's immersive creators understand that true power lies in proximity. The way a performer's breath on your neck can make allegory feel achingly personal, or how a shared glance across a crowded room transforms strangers into co-conspirators. Consider the techniques that feel revolutionary in contemporary theater. Site-specific performances in abandoned buildings, audiences handed hidden roles to play, even the use of darkness as a narrative tool. Every one of these innovations has roots in the Candlemakers' world. A 14th century script might have instructed actors to move among benches, passing a single candle to highlight key moments, an early form of the spotlight, now celebrated in productions like Sleep No More. The way modern immersive shows use environmental sounds, creaking floorboards, distant whispers, mirrors the acoustic tricks of performers who turn dripping water and rattling chains into emotional crescendos. Even the current trend of one-on-one performances, where a single audience member experiences a private scene, echoes the underground's necessity for whispered soliloquies in cramped corners. But the legacy runs deeper than staging. Those medieval artisans and actors pioneered something radical, the idea that art isn't something you watch, but something that happens to you. In a hidden crypt, when a performer gripped your wrist to emphasize a line about betrayal, it wasn't a gimmick, it was survival, a way to make sure you felt the stakes. Today's immersive theater thrives on that same principle. The haunted houses that make you sign fake contracts before entering, the dinner party mysteries where you're handed a sealed envelope with "for your eyes only," these aren't just entertainments. They're spiritual descendants of a time when attending a play meant literally holding the light that kept it alive. The most striking parallel lies in the way both eras weaponize intimacy. Underground theater forced audiences into physical closeness, shoulders touching, breath mingling, creating bonds that made betrayal unthinkable. Modern immersive shows replicate this deliberately, whether through whispered instructions or the simple act of removing chairs so crowds mill together like conspirators. Even the business models overlap. Just as Candlemakers funded performances through candle sales, today's experimental troupes often rely on adjacent ventures, bars, workshops, even candle-making classes to sustain their art. What those medieval rebels would marvel at isn't the technology we've gained, but how faithfully we've preserved the essence of what they discovered. That a story told in flickering light, where the line between spectator and participant blurs, doesn't just entertain, it imprints. When you leave an immersive show today, glancing over your shoulder as if the narrative might follow you home, you're feeling the same thrill that once sent medieval audiences slipping through alleyways, their minds buzzing with lines they'd repeat only under their breath. The candles have been replaced by LEDs, the cellars by converted warehouses, but the magic remains identical, the understanding that the most powerful stories aren't told. They're lived, and sometimes they begin with nothing more than a spark in the dark. Long after the last clandestine performance faded into history, something curious happened. Those candlelit cellars and their rebellious plays didn't disappear. They slipped into legend, walk through the streets of Bruges even today, and locals might point to a nondescript building, lowering their voices to tell you about the ghostly laughter that echoes from its basement on certain nights. Not the cackling of spirits, they'll say, but the unmistakable rhythm of an audience stifling giggles during some long-lost satire. Over in Lyon, there's a tale about a candlemaker's ghost who still tends his workshop, melting wax that smells suspiciously like grease paint. And in Prague, parents warn children not to linger near the old guild hall after dark, unless they want to hear phantom actors reciting lines no living soul remembers. These aren't just campfire stories, they're cultural memory in disguise. When authorities couldn't stamp out underground theater, they tried to erase it from records. But folklore proved harder to censor than parchment. A medieval peasant might have been forbidden to mention the cobbler's lantern, but nothing stopped them from telling their grandchildren about a mysterious shoemaker whose magical boots made tax collectors dance uncontrollably. The details blurred, the politics softened, but the subversive core remained. That's how band plays became fairy tales, their sharp edges wrapped in the comforting gauze of once upon a time. The most fascinating transformations happened in small towns where oral tradition kept the stories alive. In a village near Ghent, a passion play once performed in secret resurfaced centuries later as a shadow puppet show for children, the villain's crown suspiciously resembling the long-gone duke's insignia. Near the French border, a ballad about a lovesick weaver still gets sung at festivals, though few realize its mournful chorus originally mocked a bishop's edict. Even the candlemaker's tricks survived as superstitions. Some European households still avoid placing 3 candles in a straight line, a holdover from when it signaled danger to underground performers. Others whisper that beeswax candles burn brighter when lit for storytelling, a nod to the old alliance between flame and folklore. What's remarkable is how these legends borrow the underground's own tactics. Just as actors once hid satire in biblical tales, these myths cloak rebellion in whimsy. A ghostly troupe rehearsing in a ruined chapel isn't just a spooky story, it's a way to keep the idea of forbidden theater alive. The tale of a candle that never melts, guarding a script no one dares read aloud, isn't mere fantasy. It's a metaphor for art's persistence, and when old women in alpine villages warn that blowing out a candle too harshly silences the players, they're preserving a truth their ancestors couldn't speak outright, that some voices refuse to be extinguished. Perhaps the most poignant legacy lives on in modern festivals. In Antwerp, the annual Feast of Shadows features children carrying candles through the streets, while actors in medieval garb whisper lines from rediscovered scripts, none older than the 17th century, but all echoing much earlier works. No one calls it political theater anymore, it's tradition. Yet when the crowd joins in the final refrain, their voices rising through the lantern-lit square, the air hums with something older than nostalgia. It's the same electricity that once crackled in those hidden cellars, the unshakable sense that stories don't belong to kings or priests. They belong to the people who keep telling them, one generation at a time, whether by candlelight or campfire, in secret or in plain sight. The authorities who raided those underground performances thought they were erasing rebellion. They never imagined they were planting seeds that would grow into myths, proving that tyranny is temporary but a good story. That's forever, so the next time you hear an odd tale about laughing ghosts or candles that burn blue at midnight, listen closely. You might be hearing the last, lingering echoes of a play that refused to end. When authorities banned public theater, they accidentally created a black market for light, and candlemakers were quick to capitalize. Far from starving under censorship, many chandlers found their workshops thriving as never before. Take the case of Matthias of Augsburg, whose ledger from 1426 shows a sudden spike in special altar candles, sold to local convents' orders that conveniently doubled whenever traveling actors were rumored nearby. His real innovation, pricing. While standard tallow candles sold for 2 pennies a dozen, his script-ready versions with hollow cores and detachable bases commanded 10 times the price. This wasn't charity, it was calculated risk. Matthias knew desperate performers would pay a premium for wax that could smuggle more than just light. The economics of oppression created strange bedfellows. Wealthy merchants who'd never set foot in a playhouse became regular customers, purchasing candles by the crate to donate to churches, coincidentally the same churches whose crypts hosted underground performances. Even nobles played both sides, publicly decrying immoral theater while privately funding candlemakers who supplied it. A surviving invoice from a Bruges guild reveals one baroness ordering 500 beeswax tapers annually ostensibly for her chapel, though parish records show the building only held 50 candlesticks. The surplus delivered to a dockside warehouse that moonlighted as a rehearsal space. Some artisans took specialization to new heights. In Venice, the Dolphin family workshop produced candles with color-coded wax layers, green for comedies, red for tragedies, allowing performers to identify scripts at a glance during rushed backstage changes. Their best-selling item, rehearsal candles with irregular wicks that burned precisely 45 minutes, matching the length of a standard act. Customers paid extra for the convenience, turning what was once a simple commodity into a bespoke theatrical tool. The real profit, though, lay in accessories. Clever chandlers designed candle holders with hidden compartments beneath the drip trays, perfect for stashing folded scripts during inspections. Others sold emergency kits containing wax pellets to quickly seal open compartments, or scented oils to mask the telltale smell of ink on smuggled parchment. A Nuremberg guild even patented a candle snuffer that doubled as a seal press, allowing actors to officially stamp fake documents while covertly authenticating scripts. But the most lucrative ventures straddled legality. When Mainz authorities mandated all candles be stamped with the maker's mark to deter smuggling, savvy workshops began producing dual-purpose stamps, one side displaying their guild insignia, the other etching tiny directional arrows onto wax for backstage navigation. Sold as quality assurance tools, they became essential for underground troops performing in pitch-black cellars. The markup was astronomical. What cost a penny to produce sold for a week's wages to desperate theater companies. This grey market economy had an unexpected side effect. It elevated candlemakers from tradesmen to power brokers. Guilds that once begged for patronage now dictated terms, knowing performers couldn't afford subpar wax that might melt during a crucial scene or wicks that smoked too conspicuously. Contracts from the period show actors bartering performance rights for guaranteed candle supplies, while playwrights sometimes paid in scripts rather than coin. A single surviving agreement from Strasbourg lists a candlemaker receiving first rights to all new comedies in exchange for keeping a troupe's cellar stocked through winter. What began as survival strategy became self-perpetuating. The more authorities cracked down, the more innovation flourished, and the more indispensable candlemakers became. By the time restrictions loosened in the 16th century, many workshops had diversified into full theatrical supply, providing everything from flame-resistant stage curtains to smoke effects. The lesson was clear: oppression breeds ingenuity, and where there's darkness, someone will always find a way to sell light at a profit. Across Europe and beyond, the Candlelit rebellion took wildly different shapes, each region molding underground theater to fit its unique dangers and traditions. In England, where authorities patrolled taverns relentlessly, performers turned to puppet shows, miniature wooden actors dangling from strings, their tiny wax-dipped heads flickering in the glow of a single hidden candle. These weren't child's play. The puppets wore caricatured versions of local officials' faces, their exaggerated jaws clacking as they spouted thinly veiled satire. The real genius lay in their portability. A dissenting puppet theater could vanish into a merchant's trunk or a nun's sewing basket at the first sign of trouble, leaving nothing but a faint wax smear as evidence. Meanwhile, in the Byzantine Empire, where church authorities scrutinized every public gathering, shadow plays became the weapon of choice. Performers stretched thin parchment between candle flames and walls, their silhouettes distorted into monstrous bishops or angelic peasants with nothing more than a twist of the fingers. The medium perfectly suited Byzantine intrigue. A ruler's profile might morph seamlessly into a donkey's head, or a saint's halo dissolve into a coin purse, all without a single prosecutable word spoken. Some troops took it further, staining their parchment with translucent dyes so shadows bloomed in accusing reds or imperial purples, turning color itself into commentary. Venetian underground theater thrived in the city's infamous fog, where candlelight diffused into a glowing haze perfect for concealing quick exits. Here, performers adapted commedia dell'arte stock characters. The wily harlequin now carried a candle holder that doubled as a lockpick, while the pompous pantaloon's exaggerated pockets bulged with contraband scripts. Their plays unfolded like heists, with actors using the city's maze of canals to vanish mid-scene, leaving audiences staring at empty boats rocking in the candlelit water. In the German principalities, where guilds held immense power, candlemakers and actors developed an elaborate barter system. A troupe might perform a biting satire about corrupt merchants one night, then use the proceeds to buy wax from sympathetic chandlers, who in turn received standing ovations coded as wholesale orders. The receipts from Nuremberg's wax markets tell their own story. Sales of black candles spiked during periods of political unrest, their dark wax perfect for puppets portraying unpopular rulers. Perhaps the most daring adaptations flourished in Islamic Spain, where Moorish and Jewish performers blended traditions under constant threat. In Cordoba's hidden courtyards, shadow plays borrowed from Arabic calligraphy. Actors' hands formed flowing script that told stories of tolerance, while candlelight projected intricate geometric patterns symbolizing unity. Jewish troops took a different approach, hollowing out Hanukkah menorahs to hide tiny scrolls of satirical plays, their 8 nights of candles serving as both cover and countdown to secret performances. These regional variations shared one unshakable truth: oppression doesn't stifle creativity, it redirects it. A band actor in Paris became a puppeteer in London. A playwright silenced in Constantinople reinvented himself as a shadow caster in Thessaloniki. The methods changed, but the fire remained the same. And in every case, it was the candlemakers who provided the literal and metaphorical fuel, their wax preserving not just light, but the stubborn adaptability of the human spirit. Whether shaped into puppets, silhouettes, or coded signals, that flame proved impossible to extinguish entirely, always finding new forms in new hands. Nothing blurred the line between sacred and subversive quite like the underground plays that cloaked rebellion in scripture. Take the infamous Noah's Neighbors, a raucous comedy where the biblical flood became a thinly veiled allegory for tax collectors drowning peasants in impossible levees. The titular neighbors weren't wicked sinners, they were gossiping washerwomen and overworked cobblers, their refusal to board the ark transformed into a stand against corrupt officials. Church authorities fumed, but how could they ban a story straight from Genesis? The playwright's genius lay in the details. Noah's robes suspiciously resembled the local bishop's vestments, while the divine voice commanding the ark's construction boomed with the exact cadence of the duke's tax decrees. Other troops weaponized reverence. The martyr's candle reimagined saints' lives with contemporary twists. A weaver tortured for refusing to sell his daughter's dowry fabric to nobles became Saint Crispin, his loom beams forming a makeshift cross. Audiences wept openly, not just at the tragedy, but at the recognition this wasn't ancient Rome. It was last Tuesday's injustice wrapped in golden legend. The real stroke of brilliance, staging these plays near actual shrines, when guards interrupted a performance of The Fisher of Men, where apostles were clearly satirized as bumbling tax officials, actors seamlessly pivoted to chanting psalms, the script hidden inside a hollowed-out votive candle. The most daring walked a razor's edge between devotion and defiance. In Ghent, a passion play performed in a candlemaker's attic reserved its harshest barbs not for Roman soldiers, but for their armor meticulously crafted to mirror the local garrison's gear. Judas' 30 pieces of silver bore the mint marks of the current regime, and when Caiaphas condemned Christ, his speech echoed the bishop's latest sermon verbatim. Yet the finale disarmed critics. The resurrection scene bathed the room in dozens of suddenly unveiled candles, their collective glow symbolizing hope no tyranny could extinguish. Church spies in attendance found themselves torn. Was this heresy or the purest gospel? This ambiguity became the underground's shield. A play like The Widow's Mite, where a poor woman's coin stolen by a priest transformed into a burning brand in his purse, could be defended as a cautionary tale about greed. The same actors might perform sanctioned Bible stories by day, using identical props and costumes to blur the lines further. Candlemakers aided the illusion, crafting Lent-approved tapers with subtly altered wax colors, deep red for legitimate performances, crimson tinged for subversive ones visible only to those who knew to look. What unsettled authorities most wasn't the mockery, but the reverence twisted to new ends. When underground troops staged the Book of Esther, they emphasized not the queen's beauty, but her strategic silence, a mirror for oppressed minorities biting their tongues. The Magnificat, Mary's song of God lifting the humble, became a rallying cry for peasant revolts when sung by actresses costumed as starving millers' wives. Even the candles themselves carried dual meanings. Beeswax symbolized Christ's purity in churches, but in hidden cellars, its honeyed scent signaled a safe space to question who truly practiced his teachings. The ultimate irony, some of these blasphemous plays were later adopted by the church after political winds shifted. The Foolish Virgins, once banned for depicting noblewomen as the lamp-less bridesmaids, became a standard morality tale once the implicated families fell from power. A Venetian candlemaker's ledger from 1512 notes Riley, sold same foolish virgin candles to convent no extra charge for irony. The underground had proven its point. Scripture, like wax, could be reshaped to fit any holder. And sometimes the most dangerous flames were those that looked like altar lights. Beeswax wasn't just a luxury, it was the lifeblood of underground theater's stealth. While tallow candles sputtered and spat, their greasy smoke clinging to walls like a telltale stain, Beeswax burned with a near-silent grace, its honeyed scent masking the sweat of packed audiences. The difference wasn't merely aesthetic, it was tactical. A single tallow candle could fill a cramped cellar with enough haze to betray a gathering, while Beeswax's clean combustion left no trace but warmth and faint sweetness. Wealthy patrons who donated wax to churches never guessed their piety was being repurposed. Artisans secretly blended convent-grade beeswax with minuscule amounts of apple cider vinegar to neutralize its fragrance, creating candles that burned utterly odorless for performances requiring total secrecy. Wick innovation turned candlelight into an art form of concealment. Traditional twisted fibers produced erratic flames that danced unpredictably, casting jittery shadows perfect for revealing movement under door cracks. Underground chandlers solved this by braiding wicks with strands of flax soaked in saltpeter, ensuring a steady, upright flame that minimized flickering. Some went further, crafting hollow wicks filled with powdered lavender, not for perfume but as a silent alarm. If guards approached with torches, the rising ambient heat would release the herb's distinctive scent, giving performers precious seconds to douse lights and scatter. The most ingenious were stage wicks, deliberately uneven to control burn rates. A candle might last 20 minutes during dialogue-heavy scenes, then gutter rapidly during climactic moments, its sudden dimming cueing actors to accelerate their exits. The demands of covert performances transformed candle making itself. Standard dipping techniques produced tapered candles too fragile for frequent transport, so artisans developed a revolutionary rolled core method. By wrapping layers of wax around a central reed, they created lightweight candles that could survive jostling in script-filled satchels. Others perfected cool burning blends by adding small amounts of ambergris, which lowered melting points crucial for venues where dripping wax might reveal recently vacated hiding spots. Venetian workshops even crafted candles with dual color wax, the outer layer plain white while the core contained charcoal dark wax. Snuffing these produced an instant smokescreen, allowing actors to vanish behind a curtain of artificial night. What began as necessity birthed advancements that reshaped candle making for centuries. The same steady burning wicks developed for secret plays later illuminated libraries and operating theaters. Rolled core techniques evolved into modern molded candles. Even the charcoal wax trick resurfaced in 19th century magic acts. But perhaps the most enduring legacy was the proof that oppression doesn't stifle innovation. It forces ingenuity to burn brighter. Every clean burning candle, every shadow harnessing wick whispered the same truth. When you push art underground, it doesn't disappear. It digs deeper, roots wider, and emerges stronger where the light finally finds it. The moment the first pounding echoed on the cellar door, every flame in the room seemed to freeze. Raids didn't just interrupt performances, they became part of the show, a high-stakes improvisation where the stakes weren't applause but survival. Candlemakers had rehearsed for this like actors rehearsed lines, their workshops riddled with last-minute escapes disguised as ordinary fixtures. A barrel of tallow might swing open to reveal a rope ladder descending into the sewers. A shelf stacked with wax bricks could pivot on hidden hinges, its backside plastered with fake inventory lists to fool pursuing guards. The real artistry lay in the details, flour dusted on tunnel entrances to reveal footprints of intruders, or candle stubs placed at precise intervals to mark safe passage through the blackness. Some escapes were pure theater. In Prague, a troupe perfected a martyred exit. When soldiers burst in, the lead actor would dramatically collapse onto a trapdoor rigged with a bladder of pig's blood, his corpse vanishing beneath the stage in a gruesome splash as the real performer slithered away through a drainage pipe. Other troupes weaponized chaos. A well-timed kick to a beeswax candle sent it rolling into straw, the sudden smoke screen masking actors slipping into priests' robes hung ready by the exit. The most daring relied on the guard's own superstitions. A Lille candle maker lined his escape tunnel with ghost lights, candles colored pale blue with copper salts that burned unnaturally cold, convincing pursuers they'd stumbled into a haunted crypt. Audiences became unwitting accomplices. Regulars knew to scatter in predetermined directions, some toward the church, others to the market, their divergent paths confusing pursuers. A wealthy merchant might suddenly faint across a hidden trapdoor, his velvet cloak obscuring the actor's disappearance. Children were especially adept, trained to swarm guards with offers of help, their small hands deftly unlatching back panels or pocketing incriminating props. The real genius was how these escapes fed the underground's mythology. When performers vanished mid-soliloquy, leaving only a single candle flickering on an empty stool, the story didn't end, it multiplied. By dawn, a dozen versions would circulate. The actors had turned into shadows, been spirited away by sympathetic spirits, or simply walked through walls. The most legendary vanishings weren't just practical, they were poetic. After a raid in Antwerp, guards found a cellar empty except for a lone candle burning atop a pile of discarded costumes. As they watched, the flame guttered out only for a hidden wax mechanism to ignite a second wick inside the hollow base, making the candle seemingly relight itself. By the time they realized it was a timed diversion, the troupe was halfway to Ghent, their next script already being memorized by Candlelight in a moving wagon. These weren't just escapes, they were final scenes, proof that the show always won. Because in the end, the authorities weren't just chasing actors, they were chasing stories. And stories, once set loose, are impossible to catch. Modern recreations of these underground performances don't just revive forgotten plays, they resurrect an entire way of experiencing theatre. Picture a dimly lit cellar in Bruges today, where historians and actors huddle around a single beeswax candle, its flame casting elongated shadows against rough stone walls. The air smells of hot wax and damp earth, just as it would have 6 centuries ago. But what makes these reconstructions so powerful isn't the historical accuracy, it's the way they force us to confront the fragility of culture. That flickering light becomes a time machine, illuminating how easily stories can vanish when authority decides they shouldn't exist. Take the work of the Hidden Light Collective, a theatre group specializing in lost medieval scripts. Their performances begin with a ritual. Each audience member receives a handmade candle, its wick trimmed to match surviving guild specifications. As the play unfolds, perhaps a rediscovered satire about a corrupt miller, actors manipulate the light with precision. A sudden tilt of a candle holder transforms a comic scene into something ominous. A pooled ring of melted wax marks the exact spot where an actor will later kneel for a climactic confession. These aren't just artistic choices, they're painstaking recreations of techniques found in Candlemakers' encrypted notes. What shocks modern audiences isn't the simplicity of these stagings, but their emotional potency. Without microphones or spotlights, every rustle of fabric, every controlled breath becomes magnified. When a performer snuffs out a candle midline, a technique used to signal danger in the original underground shows, the darkness feels visceral, a shared gasp passing through the crowd. Historians argue this intimacy was the rebels' secret weapon. You can't ignore injustice when it's whispered 2 feet from your face. The most revealing moments come during post-show discussions, when spectators often admit they expected primitive entertainment. Instead, they've witnessed something timeless, the raw power of stories told without safety nets. A recent performance of The Widow's Coins in Ghent left viewers in tears, not because the medieval script was sentimental, but because its critique of wealth inequality felt unnervingly current. That's the real magic of these reconstructions. They prove oppression and resistance wear different costumes across centuries, but the script remains eerily familiar. Beyond nostalgia, these projects serve a vital scholarly purpose. By testing theories about how candles were used as cues, did 3 quick flickers really signal a scene change, or was it 2? Researchers gain new respect for the ingenuity of the originals. In one breakthrough, a team discovered that certain wax blends produced flames visible through thin parchment, but not solid walls, perfect for covert rehearsals. Another group decoded why underground scripts often specified left-handed candle holders. The angle of shadows helped mask performers' faces from potential informants in the crowd. Yet for all their historical rigor, these recreations inevitably become acts of imagination, gaps in the record force artists to improvise. When staging the fragmentary Song of the Silent Bell, director Elena Verla made the bold choice to have actors pass a single candle while speaking the missing lines in unison, a haunting effect that, while invented, captured the collaborative spirit of the underground. "We're not just rebuilding the past," she explains, "we're dialoguing with it." Perhaps the most poignant lesson emerges when things go wrong. During a performance in Lyon, a gust of wind extinguished every candle simultaneously, an accident that would have meant disaster for medieval actors. Instead of panicking, the modern cast leaned into the darkness, finishing the scene with voices alone. Later, they found historical accounts describing identical mishaps, complete with instructions for covering the silence with improvised coughing fits. In that moment, 600 years collapsed. The line between past and present wasn't just blurred, it burned away entirely, leaving only the shared human instinct to keep the story alive, no matter what. These candlelit experiments do more than preserve history. They challenge our assumptions about cultural survival. In an age where information feels permanent, watching actors reconstruct plays from fragments reminds us how much has been lost to time and tyranny. That fragile flame becomes a metaphor. Art doesn't endure because it's indestructible, but because someone, somewhere, keeps choosing to relight it. And sometimes all it takes is one stubborn wick, one guarded secret, one cellar full of shadows to ensure the show goes on. The candlemakers of medieval Europe didn't just light rooms. They lit imaginations, proving that even the smallest flame can hold back the dark. Their legacy isn't confined to the past. It's a living testament to the unbreakable bond between creativity and resistance. Think about the sheer audacity of their defiance, using something as ordinary as wax and wicks to safeguard stories that powers feared enough to ban. Every flickering taper in a hidden cellar was a quiet revolution, a refusal to let fear extinguish the human need to connect, to question, to dream. What makes their story resonate centuries later isn't just the ingenuity of hollow candles or coded wicks, it's the universal truth they uncovered. Oppression thrives on silence, but art refuses to be mute. Those candle makers understood that light isn't merely functional, it's symbolic. A single flame could illuminate a script, yes, but it could also ignite solidarity among strangers huddled in the dark. When authorities raided one cellar, they often found nothing but melted wax and echoes. The real performance had already moved elsewhere, carried in the memories of those who'd been there, ready to be kindled again in another hidden space, another willing heart. This isn't just history, it's a playbook for resilience. Today, the tools have changed, but the stakes feel familiar. Where modern creators use encrypted apps or underground podcasts, medieval artisans had their beeswax and shadow plays. The core struggle remains the same, the fight to share stories that challenge, discomfort, or delight, regardless of who tries to shutter them. The candlemakers' greatest lesson wasn't about hiding art, it was about making it indispensable. They embedded rebellion into the fabric of everyday life, turning something as mundane as a candle delivery into an act of quiet rebellion. So the next time you strike a match or flip a switch, pause for a moment. That light connects you to an unbroken chain of flame keepers, people who believed enough in the power of stories to risk everything. Their courage echoes in every artist who writes despite censorship, every performer who dances in defiance, every voice that rises when others demand silence. The candlemakers didn't just preserve theater, they proved that creativity, once kindled, can't be snuffed out by force. It simply finds new fuel, new forms, and new hands to carry it forward. And if their story lingers with you, pass it on. Share their tale like a candle passed hand to hand in the dark, because the surest way to honor their legacy isn't just remembering, it's ensuring the light keeps moving, reaching those who need its warmth most. After all, the world still has its share of shadows. But as long as there are stories to tell and people willing to listen, the flame they guarded so fiercely will